Welcome again to American Krishna, where we dive specifically on these lives into the wisdom, the loving wisdom of the Vedic scriptures. Vedic meaning the Vedic scriptures, the corpus of ancient Sanskrit texts from ancient India. So for those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. We specifically read the Bhagavad-Gita, the song of the Lord. And the particular edition that we have is the one that is written by Hridayananda Das Goswami, a direct disciple of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, who we believe, came to America to teach basically the world back in the mid-60s about Krishna. Krishna, who is ultimately the author or speaker of the Bhagavad-Gita. And so we're going through his particular edition, which starts with a thematic unpacking of the main themes that you find in the Bhagavad-Gita, and then wherever there's a few references and parentheses, as you can see here, we'll actually go to the actual verses to see what Krishna is actually telling Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, which is the setting, and what he's basically telling humanity, what he's telling you, what he's telling us. So we're in the introduction. And here we go. Legitimate rulers expect their generals to defend the law. So Krishna expected Arjuna to fight at Kurukshetra rather than to allow rule by fraud, coercion, and usurpation. Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, we already went through this, the second part here, the paragraph that reads, the event of this sacred history occur on three levels, earthly, cosmic, and spiritual. Because yesterday we spoke about, or 2 days ago, about the demons and the demigods. So let's go a little bit further into the book, so that we don't repeat ourselves, although it's always nice to repeat these transcendental topics. The origins of the Gita. Let's go with that, okay? The origins of the Gita. What has scholarship said about the origin of the Bhagavad-Gita? About 1500 years ago, the great mathematician astronomer Aryabhata concluded from archaeo-astronomical data in the Mahabharata that the Kurukshetra war, the setting of Bhagavad Gita, took place approximately 5,100 years ago. So this is long. This is an old text. If this is true, if this stuff is true, it's one of the oldest extant, scriptures on earth. 5,000 years. That's really old. Some modern scholars, especially from the West, have resisted such antiquity, speculating that the Gita was composed roughly between the 5th and 2nd century BCE. And there's a little footnote here. I love this footnote. Pay attention to this. This is technical, but it's a great footnote. Okay, so let's read it together, or hear attentively, my friends. These scholars invariably date the Gita after the time of Buddha, whose birth is believed to be in the 6th century BCE. Their reason, the Gita 5 times at 272, 524, 525, 26, and 615 uses the word nirvana, a term often used by Gautama Buddha, right? So you get the point. Scholars, one of the arguments by some scholars, claiming that the Gita is not 5,000 years old, but it's actually post-Buddha. In other words, it was written after the appearance of Buddha, is that, look, the text itself has the word called nirvana. And obviously that's a Buddhist term. Obviously that's a term that Buddha, came up with. So here's what the author says. Here's what Hridayananda says. Clearly we have 3 possibilities here. 1, Krishna borrowed the term from Buddha, which is what they're saying, right? 2, Buddha borrowed the term from Krishna. You see, that's the other possibility that they're not willing to consider. That, hey, Buddha was just using a term, nirvana, that was already present, around in India at his time. He, tilted or, tweaked the meaning of the word, but he didn't come up with the concept. Or 3, Krishna and Buddha independently used the same word. That is also another option, right? On a prominent academic forum that includes many of the world's leading Indologists, I recently asked whether there is definitive evidence for possibly 1, that Krishna borrowed the term nirvana from Buddha. Like, okay, you guys say that Krishna borrowed the term from Buddha, and therefore the Bhagavad-Gita is older than Buddha. No one was able to supply any such evidence. And one senior scholar wrote, quote, "I don't think we can rule out the possibility that the term is pre-Buddhist," unquote. This notwithstanding, most Western scholars continue to assume, write, and teach that the Gita must be later than Buddhism because it uses the term nirvana. And I love how he ends, "Oh well, oh well," like, too bad, So let's go back to what he says here after this little footnote. Some modern scholars, right? They say that it's such scholars also often doubt the historicity of most of Mahabharata events, whereas other scholars, East and West, and most Hindus accept both their antiquity and historicity. Who is right? Right. Limited empirical evidence does not allow worldly scholarship to definitely affirm or deny such claims, and much less to speak authoritatively about Krishna's divinity. And this is a really cool point here. This is a little bit of philosophy of religion, but it makes great sense. Just as declaring an algebraic equation right or wrong is to make an algebraic claim, so also declaring a metaphysical statement right or wrong is to make a metaphysical claim. And the ground rules of worldly scholarship do not smile upon metaphysical claims. I remember the author himself, Hridayananda Maharaj, this must have been about 25 years ago in Los Angeles. He gave a talk at the Krishna temple in Culver City, and then he made what I thought was a brilliant point, that look, if you say Zeus is, the supreme god of, thunder, that's a metaphysical claim. But if you say Zeus is not the god of thunder, that claim is equally as metaphysical as the claim that it is, right? You're talking metaphysics, right? So, let's stick to our lanes, right? And that's what, Hridayananda Maharaj here is that's his point. Like, if you're going to talk scholarship, history, okay, stick to that lane, right? But don't start, disclaiming metaphysical claims unless you agree that you are also making a metaphysical claim. And now we've changed lanes and we're talking theology and metaphysics and no longer, for example, carbon dating and history, right? That's an interesting point. So, coming back here. The conclusion is that despite the plethora of learned best guesses, worldly scholarship lacks sufficient evidence to prove the date and origin of Bhagavad-Gita beyond reasonable doubt. Other extraordinary claims, such as Krishna's assertion that he originally spoke the Gita to a sun deity, entail no internal contradiction or other logical absurdity, and thus must remain sacred claims, also beyond the power of worldly scholarship to mark right and wrong. So again, if you're going to say that, Zeus is the king of thunder, is the god of thunder, if you're going to say, no, he's not, you're making a theological claim. So here, Hridayananda Maharaj is referring to a famous verse, 4.1, where, and let's go to it here. At 4.1, Krishna says, let me take out the highlight. Take out this highlight too. He says, I taught this imperishable yoga to Vivasvan. Vivasvan told Manu. Manu spoke to Ikshvaku, right? And there's a footnote. Oh, there's no footnote. But the point is, Vivasvan and Manu. Vivasvan is another name for the sun god, right? So we're talking millions and millions of years ago. So the claim that Krishna himself is making is that he spoke this stuff long ago, right? And so a scholar may come and say, well, how dare you say that? Well, look, dude, this is a metaphysical claim. You want to get into metaphysics? You want to talk theology? Okay. But we're no longer doing, historicity and the dating, because it's a theological claim. Interesting point, but it's an important one to make. So let's go back to the verse we were, back to 13. Okay. Scholars often wonder whether the Gita formed part of the original Mahabharata or was added later. Again, a lack of historiographic evidence precludes a definitive academic response. In the 20th century, the world's most distinguished Sanskritists attempted to reconstruct the original Mahabharata from dozens of surviving recensions. After half a century of brilliant, assiduous study, they admitted that it is beyond the powers of worldly scholarship to recreate and thus conclusively identify an original version of this text. Thus, scholarship can hardly determine whether the Gita is part of an original text that no one can clearly reconstruct. Scholarly controversies often burn hottest precisely where evidence is weakest and leaves the largest space for conflicting opinions. Questions of the Gita's original date and formation provide ample opportunity for just this sort of endless academic debate, which I intend to avoid here. Now here this is cool. This is the point. This is the whole point. Okay, so there's like this big confusion or uncertainty, at least from an academic perspective. What are we left with? Well, here. What we do know beyond doubt is that the Bhagavad-Gita has inspired and illumined a huge and growing number of souls. That's the point. Like the Bhagavad-Gita has been a light of inspiration for millions and millions and millions of people for thousands and thousands of years. That's significant, right? Krishna's devotees claim that we have the very Gita that Lord Krishna intended for us. Not just that, we claim, devotees of Krishna claim that, hey, this is the, God is Krishna, like this dude, right? And Krishna came down 5,000 years ago and he spoke, and we have the recording. What a claim, right? What a claim. In their view, rather than battling over the Gita's provenance, in other words, where it comes from, when was it written, and so on, we should take advantage of its profound wisdom, which has long lightened loads, gladdened hearts, excited intelligences, and guided souls in their quest for ultimate meaning. So that's the point. Like whether the Gita is 5,000 years old or 2,000 years old, the point is that it obviously has amazing wisdom because the fact is that it's inspired millions and millions and millions over thousands of years. In Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna teaches that there are three fundamental real things: souls, nature, and God. All right, so these are the three sort of ontologies in the Bhagavad-Gita. We can also call them tattvas. The term tattva in Sanskrit refers to like ontological categories of truth. So you have souls, that's called jiva tattva. The jiva meaning soul. So jiva tattva, the truth about souls, or soul truth. And then you have nature, right? The material world. So prakriti, that's another term. So prakriti tattva, so nature truth. And then God, right? Vishnu tattva. And note that, souls and God are one and yet different. And this is where, the Advaita Vedantists, or the Mayavadis as we call them in devotee circles, the non-dualists, the impersonalists, those who claim that there is no difference between the soul and God, this is where we'll say they get it wrong, at least according to the Bhagavad Gita. At least according to Krishna's teachings, Krishna himself in the Bhagavad Gita claims very clearly that even though each soul is qualitatively one with him, with Krishna, they're quantitatively different. They're different also. So they're one and yet different. And that's where, again, the Mayavadis, the impersonalists will say, no, they're only one. Right? We think we're different from God because we're an illusion, and we just have to meditate long enough. And then we'll realize that we're all one, right? But that's not what Krishna teaches. Because in the Bhagavad Gita, you have this clear distinction of tattvas, where there's such a thing as souls, individual souls, and God, and they're one, and yet they're different. He also teaches that God's relationship with fallen souls is mediated by the laws of karma, yes, and that awakened souls approach and relate to God through yajna, the process of devoted offering, right? All this will be explained in the next 5 sections, right? So he kind of Hridayana Maharshi here is like summarizing basically the whole Bhagavad-Gita in one or two sentences, right? There's souls, there's nature, there's God. Conditioned souls down here are stuck with this law of karma, and if they perform yajna, if they perform sacrifice, which in this age of Kali, the dark age that we live in, the process, the recommended sacrifice is simply to chant God's names with devotion, to chant God's names. And by the sheer power of God's names and connecting with God's names consciously with love, we reawaken, or Krishna himself helps us reawaken our dormant love for him. He gets rid of our karma, of our sinful reactions, and we live as happily as possible in this world. And when we die, when the body dies, we go, as Prabhupada would often say, we go back home, back to Godhead, right? So let's see how long we've been talking. 15 minutes. Let's go on a little bit longer, huh? Another 5-10 minutes. We're going to start now with section 2, individual eternal persons, or Purusha. The term Purusha refers to person. Okay, let's go. The Gita teaches that every living being in this world is an eternal soul encased in a temporal material body. Right? That's the first thing we learn in the Bhagavad-Gita, right? We're not this body, we're souls, and we are in a physical body. Each soul has always existed and will always exist as a personal individual being. So this is really, really important here, this point of individuality. Because remember, I just said like the non-devotees, the impersonalists, the Mayavadis, the non-dualists will stress only and exclusively that we're all one, that we're not persons, we're not individual beings. We're actually all just one supreme corporate radiance. Hridayana Maharshi calls it a corporate radiance, merging into some sort of corporate radiance. I like that term, right? But Krishna himself teaches here, look at this, in verse 12:2, a famous verse, right? Let me take out here we go. Never did I not exist, nor you, nor these rulers of people. And then the key term here, the key words here is, nor indeed shall we ever not be. This is where, like, Prabhupada really stressed this point from this particular verse, right? And he makes a good argument in his Bhagavad Gita commentary that, look, if we are all one, then Krishna would not stress that we're individual eternal beings in the future, right? So Prabhupada makes this very brilliant point that, look, Krishna here, when Krishna is saying that, hey, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you individually, nor all these kings individually, one could say, yeah, that's in our conditioned state. In our conditioned state, where we think because of our ego that we're all one, that we're individuals, right? But once we become liberated, once we attain freedom from the cycle of birth and death, we become one, right? But Prabhupada was like, no, why would Krishna say and emphasize that even in the future, and here we, the way Hridayana Maharshi here translates it, nor indeed shall we ever not be, right? So, like Prabhupada says, Krishna has established the individuality of the soul in the past. Krishna establishes the individuality of the soul in the present, and Krishna establishes the individuality of the soul in the future. So according to Prabhupada, this is exactly what Krishna is teaching, right? And so we as devotees of Krishna, we take that seriously. When Krishna is saying, hey, indeed shall we ever not be in the future, that means that we're eternal persons eternally. What does that mean? That opens up a whole beautiful, beautiful, beautiful realm, an esoteric realm of eschatology, of what happens to the soul, to the individual soul when the soul dies. When the body dies, right? If it's not the case that we merge into some sort of, cosmic radiance and become one and just kind of float in oneness, right? If that's not the case, if Krishna is actually teaching that, hey, look, I'm a person and you're a person too, we're all persons, then what happens when we die? What happens when our body dies? Well, this is where Gaudiya Vaishnavism in general, but specifically Gaudiya Vaishnavism, because I know Vaishnavism better than South Indian Vaishnavism, offers this unique conception of individual souls reawakening their original forms, and in their original spiritual forms having very intimate exchanges of love and service with Krishna and Krishna's eternal associates in the spiritual world, right? And so, we could really talk about that a lot, and there's beautiful poems written by what we would say, liberated souls, saints who even in their embodied life know what is their identity, their individual identity in the kingdom of God, vis-a-vis Radha and Krishna, vis-a-vis Krishna and his eternal associates. What do they do there eternally? What kind of service do they render to Krishna? Do they go and play with Krishna in the in the pastoral heavenly forests, or do they string garlands to offer to Radha and Krishna? So this is like super esoteric stuff, but that's what Vaishnavism has to offer, right? As an alternative to the idea that we're all one. Okay, if we're not all one, well, what do we do? What happens when the body dies? Well, you reawaken your dormant form, your swarup as it's called, and you engage in eternal loving service and exchanges of spontaneous love with the Supreme Person, this dude right here. So, let's continue. Each soul has always existed and will always exist as personal individual beings. Yes, only the material body begins and ends, right? So this is another reference in 218. Krishna makes it very clear, right, that these bodies of the eternal, indestructible, immeasurable, embodied soul are set to end, right? And so, no one has to remind us of our mortality, right? We're going to die, right? We're going to die. These bodies are not going to stay forever, right? They're not going to stay forever. So, and Krishna clearly says it, because the soul is never born and never dies, right? So here in 216 to 221, there's this really beautiful section of verses where Krishna talks about the soul. And funny enough, this is exactly the verses that I wanted to quote at the Catholic Church next to the Saint Geneviève Church in Paris, next to the Pantheon, where my dad was, buried. Well, he wasn't buried there, but the funeral was there. And I got into an argument with the local priest the day before, or the week before, like requesting the right as the only priest in the Warrer, that's my last name, family, to say a few, to quote a few verses from the Bhagavad-Gita. And as you'll see here, let's go to them. These are verses that are very universal. They talk about, the eternality of the soul. Nothing about Krishna specifically. I didn't want to make the faux pas of, going up there and say, hey guys, did you know that Jesus is the son of Krishna? Like, I wouldn't do that. But at least to speak about the eternality of the soul, how our dear father or grandfather or friend, for whoever's in the audience, is still alive. He's just moved on somewhere else, whether back to heaven or to some other realm, without getting into details. He's still alive. He's eternal. We shouldn't be that sad, but that closed-minded priest said no. Anyway, let's read these verses and stop. Ready? Beautiful, beautiful section. The unreal has no existence. The real, no non-existence. In fact, truth seers have seen the certainty of both. Know the indestructible that pervades all this. No one can destroy that which does not perish. These bodies of the eternal, indestructible, immeasurable, embodied soul are set to end. Therefore fight, Bharata. Neither one who thinks the soul a killer, nor one who thinks it killed understands. The soul neither kills nor is killed. The soul is never born and never dies, nor having existed will it ever not be. This is an interesting point. I have a friend called Joseph, Father Joseph. He used to be a brahmachari, like a monk in the Hare Krishna movement in New Vrindavan in West Virginia in the mid-'80s. And he tapped out because, there was so much craziness going on there. As you can see in the Peacock 6-hour special that you can look, and I would recommend you look at it. Get some popcorn. It's entertaining. Anyway, so he went on to become a Christian Orthodox priest, and so he knows Christian theology really, really well. And he told me, interestingly, when I visited him last, that one of the things that distinguishes, let's say, Christianity from Vaishnavism is the idea that in Vaishnavism the soul is eternal, whereas in Christianity there's more of an ex nihilo, if I'm using the term properly, sort of a creation of the soul, right? And so here, coming to this point, right, Krishna says that the soul is never born and never dies, nor having existed will it ever not be. Unborn, eternal, everlasting, primeval, it is not killed when the body is killed, right? And the analogy that's given, I find really cool, is this analogy of you got a sun and rays, sun rays. So souls are like the sun rays that emanate from the sun. But just imagine a sun that's always shined and rays that have been always emanating from the sun, like eternally. So that's, in that sense, how souls are related to the sun, right? Unborn, eternal, everlasting, primeval, it is not killed when the body is killed. So it's kind of good news to remember that we're eternal, like John Lennon. For those of you who may not know John Lennon, the Beatles, that band, the Beatles, did survive the passing of time. So most people have heard of the Beatles and continue to listen to their music because it was so marvelous. So John Lennon wrote this song, Instant Karma, and the chorus is, we all shine on because we all shine on, right? So that's what Krishna is telling us right here. Thanks for being here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to purify myself, and may we have a blessed day in Krishna or God consciousness. Hare Krishna.